Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. For those of you who are first-time viewers, a big warm USO welcome. And those of you who tune in the first time, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you today. As Trish mentioned, I am a military spouse, and I've been through several deployments, extended TDYs, those crazy training schedules and the like. And I just so vividly remember trying to figure out how to handle my emotions and often feeling lost with how to do that, not to mention the emotions and feelings of family members who were also going through this separation from my husband. So that's why this series is so important to me personally. And I'm just so thrilled that we have Corie and Matt Weathers with us who can help talk us through some tools and concepts throughout this series. So Corie, thank you for joining us today. I know that you are missing your other half right now. How are you doing?
Hey, everybody. Thank you, Laura, so much. It's great to see everybody and see everybody in the chat. You guys are already telling me where you're watching from, so please head over to the chat and let me know where you are. Yeah, like Laura, like you said, Matt is not here with me right now for obvious reasons. If you've been following last month's webinar that we did, we talked about the tension before you go. If you guys have not watched that, I would encourage you to go back to the USO dashboard for this series and you'll see we talked about all the ups and downs and all the emotions that you go through before you rip the Band-Aid, which is what we're going to talk about today. So obviously the Band-Aid has been ripped and Matt is en route. And so he's not in a place where he can join us today, but especially if you are a service member or if you're a spouse that was really looking forward to hearing Matt's perspective, I'm going to be sharing some of the notes and some of the things that he wanted to relay today. He'll join us for that next one. And we're going to make sure that this is just as much for everybody watching. And this is for the service member. It's also for the spouse. This is a family perspective on all of that. So Matt and I did lots of talking in the last several weeks since the last webinar. And I'm really, really looking forward to spending some more time with you guys today. So Laura, I don't know if there was anything else I kind of just started to take off there.
No, please take off. I think a lot of people in the registration talked about how they can kind of set goals for themselves and their objectives, both the service member who's obviously has to focus on their mission, and then the families and wanting to do that for themselves. So I think we should get started and jump on in.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks. All right. So guys, here's the thing. This is best when it's interactive. And I know there's tons of Zoom and virtual events that are happening in our world today, but really this is better when you guys interact with me. And so I want to encourage you guys to use that chat thread. And so I want to just kind of start. If you're able to share with me, I would love to start with asking you guys to put in the chat, let me know, where are you at in this military cycle, right? So are you going through a deployment? Are you going through an unaccompanied tour? Are you geo-batching? Are you kind of in the middle where you've kind of gone through a deployment and you're home now and trying to reintegrate? Tell me where you are in this whole cycle. Maybe we even have brand new military couples who've not gone through it before and they're kind of wondering what it's going to be like and they're trying to learn before they go through it. So tell me where you are in the cycle, and that lets me know who's in the audience because here's what the way that I see webinars like this, where you guys get to participate, is this is not just about me or Matt sharing our information. There's so much wisdom in the room, and I love to pull from the interaction of what you guys have learned too. And so I'm counting on you guys to share with me some of the lessons learned that you have as well, because I don't know everything, right? So first off, I see we have people from Alaska, Hawaii, Germany. It's great we've got somebody from Germany because we also wanted to do today's event that would really be at a good time for those of you who are in Europe. We hope to do those more often. Let's see, we have somebody in Virginia Beach, and then we also have somebody's about to rip the Band-Aid, it looks like. So we use that phrase, ripping the Band-Aid. So if you've not heard that phrase before, I had to ask my kids this morning, like, do you guys know what that phrase means? So if you've not gone through that, it's basically this whole idea during, especially pre-deployment, where you do have that tension before you go and you have this roller coaster of emotions, which we're going to review just a little bit. But then you get to this moment where you have to say goodbye, whether you're saying goodbye before you're choosing to do that geobatch and having to travel and say, this is it. Like, this is what we're doing. But it's that moment of just like, I think in the military community, we use that phrase a lot. How many of you guys have used it, right? Where you go, all right, I've had all these emotions for so long, it's dragging out, and let's just get it over with. Like, let's just get the goodbye over with. And I remember in the first deployment, I really felt guilty, I think, for having that feeling of like, why I feel bad for wanting to him to just leave. And I don't know if you need to hear this today or if you've gone through this today, but I think it's also very normal to have that feeling of like, I almost wish that we could get this over with sooner. Like, could we say goodbye sooner, just so the angst, that feeling that you're having on the inside, is over faster? Anybody else been through that? So you guys are doing such a great job. I got to catch up in the chat over here. So we do have somebody that's their spouse is getting ready to leave. Heidi says they're getting ready for another deployment, and another one in less than a year. It was a 7-month deployment. Somebody else is going through a deployment to Germany, getting ready. So we have a lot of people who are getting ready or are in a deployment. Not that this is great. I was going to say that's great. No, it's not great, but it's great that we have so many people who are understanding, and that this is hopefully going to hopefully resonate with you guys today. More that we've got somebody whose husband is in training, and we wanted to do this for those of you who are going through TDYs, because that's also a military initiated separation, right? Where you're spending weeks apart, months apart, depending on what kind of training that looks like. I know for our second deployment, Matt spent 2 months in Australia, then came home for a couple of weeks and then left for his deployment. So that was strange, right? There seems to be never like the cookie cutter way of going through any of this. Let's see. So some of you are experiencing your spouse being home for the first time in a very long time. I know I spoke with some other people that I was working with this morning before this event who are about to go through a deployment, and they go through rapid events all the time. So we have a great group of people paying attention today and are here. I'm so glad that you're here. Please use the chat, because again, you guys have so much to share, so much mentoring to offer. It's not just about what I have to offer to you today. Okay, so going back to today's topic is ripping that Band-Aid. And so I don't want you guys, I think, just kind of vision casting here. Today is not going to be about swimming in the sadness, right? So we all know what that feels like. It is an excruciating moment to say goodbye, to say the least, right? It is a painful thing to go through. And having today's topic be about ripping the Band-Aid is not so much about sitting in that sadness completely and only talking about that. Today's topic is a little bit more about normalizing those emotions, those roller coaster of emotions that you experienced beforehand, and then also those emotions as you say goodbye. But then what do we do after that, right? Because I think in my first deployment, I would ask the advice of other people, and I had varying levels of advice. And there's no wrong way to do this. And so I would love to ask from you guys, what do you do? Let's talk about before we rip the Band-Aid. So before we say goodbye, right? What did you do? What were some signs? Let's do this. What are some signs that you're overwhelmed and you need to do some level of self-care or sanity work for yourself before you say goodbye, right? You have all these overwhelming emotions, weeks, sometimes even prior, but as you lead up to, it can be very easy, I think, for the service member to, like we talked about in the last webinar, to just kind of start to shift focus towards the mission and start to get excited about it and being ready to just go. I know one of the things I saw with Matt over the last couple of weeks, especially leading up before he left, was like, he was really trying to give his all, his 100% here at home, because he knew that he was going to have to leave us to kind of have to handle it on his own. And he didn't want us to leave us hanging, right? So he was trying to think about the cars and think about the house. And I saw him almost overworking. And I think every service member has their own routine. If I have any service members that are watching, I would love to know, especially if you've done this before. I see, is it Shawnee was saying she feels like a pro sometimes, and that this is definitely the hardest. I don't think there's any such thing, just to kind of validate your experience, Shawnee, I don't think there's any such thing of us getting to a place where we suddenly have it all together and we're a pro at it and it's never going to be hard. At least that's what I have mentoring spouses telling me, because I get mentoring too. And so I have spouses well seasoned couples that tell us, it's not that it gets easier, it just gets different, and we still can learn. And I think what this is about is taking these lessons learned so that we maybe don't have to go through the same thing every time, that we're evolving each time and that we're growing through each time. So if you are a service member, share with me, what is your experience at right before you have to go? Do you see yourself kind of turning towards that mission, trying to think about what your life is going to have to be like in that training or in that geobatching situation, or where you're going to be living, or having a different mindset if you have to go to a different country? Some of you are doing unaccompanied tours to Korea, like having to put your mind around, I have to live in another country and I'm yet not deployed, right? Like you're trying to make this make sense out of what your life is suddenly going to be like. What do you see yourself doing right before you go? What's happening internally? So share with me, for those of you who are service members. I saw we were also having somebody from Germany that was coming in. What is that experience like? So I can tell you for Matt, I saw him really overworking almost. There was a point where I was like, I know I'm not going to convince you otherwise. I know you're going to do it anyways, which I think was something I learned from the first time. For the first time, I was like, you don't have to do this. Stop doing it. Like, let me take on some things. And there was part of me that wanted to take on the responsibilities as if I was practicing, like getting ready to take care of all of it, and somehow taking that load off of his list. And simultaneously, what he was trying to do is set us up for success. And so that in the past turned into ripe opportunities for conflict, because we were both trying to do the same thing. So, but this time, what I learned differently this time was being able to say, I know I'm not going to be able to stop you. This is part of what you need to do to ready yourself to go, is that you can do all of these things with the intention that what he was trying to do was free himself. Like by taking care of us before he left, he was freeing himself to then go saying, I did everything that I could. Right. And there's a few things he didn't get to that I had to say, like even on the drive to go drop him off, like, it's okay. It's okay. Like you did so much. And I noticed this time for me, it was that was one thing that helped this time, that we did better, that I did better, is that I was able to go, I was able to leverage gratitude and leverage that by saying, hey, thank you. Like, I know you didn't get to those things, but thank you for setting us up. That meant so much to me. And I feel so much more secure because of what you did. And that means a lot. So instead of me stopping it, or all these things I wish you would be doing, or whatever, like there's a lot of things we could be saying, right? That gratitude, I'm hoping it was helpful to him. I think it was definitely helpful for me this time. Okay, so Jason says, there's so many things going around in your head, not wanting to leave, feeling guilty for leaving, terrible guilt. Yes, absolutely. Anxiety of whether everything will be okay. What's work going to be like? Will I come home on time? Will I fail? Will I succeed? So many things. So I want to talk about that, Jason, here for just a minute, because I think it's really easy to think that since I'm the military spouse that's here today, that we're only going to talk about the spouse perspective. And we are going to talk about that. But I think the overall goal of this whole series is to talk about the family and talk about both sides, because we want to both do it better, right? So I want to talk about that, Jason, for just a minute, and talk about what's going on in that service member, because and there's a lot of service members that don't share that, Jason, that don't actually verbalize out loud all of that push and pull. When I had a chance in 2015 to go travel with the Secretary of Defense, and it was only for 9 days, but Matt and I used that trip as an opportunity just for a split moment, for like a small window of time, to use it as an experiment to go, okay, we're switching roles all of a sudden. He was at home and he was having to receive household goods the day I was leaving. We had just PCS'd, and the timing of all of it could not have been more perfect. So here he was receiving household goods by himself, helping the kids transition, looking into the new school, all in the 9 days that I was going to have to go. And I am the one that's going overseas. I'm the one trying to get all the visas together and envision what we're about to do and what I'm about to see. And I'm getting requests from the Secretary of Defense's office on what size armor plates I was going to need to wear. Like I was in this place of like, oh my gosh, where am I going? And is this the right decision? And I'm leaving at a time that's like crucial for my kids and my family that I should be there to help. And so we used it as an experiment to switch roles and really sit in the pocket of understanding that for the first time ever and really paying attention to all those feelings. And so I say all of that, Jason, to say that I remember Matt telling me, like, pay attention. This push pull feeling that you're having, this I want to go and I wonder what it's going to be like. And I think it's going to be interesting to see these other countries, to see these other cultures, to see the coalition of other countries working with our service members, to see all the branches working together. That was exciting. That was something that was really exciting. But I also had this terrible guilt of leaving my family at home during a very vulnerable time. And so it can feel like your head is in a million places at once. And so I think for those of you who are service members, you being able to go, like, to be able to express that before you go, to be able to go, I want to be here so bad and I hate that I'm leaving. And if that's hard to say, because for most of you, probably for all of you, tears well up, right? And it makes you so vulnerable to allow yourself to sit in that pocket. And I know there were so many times over the last couple of weeks, Matt would tear up and then I would tear up and then we're like, no, not right now. We made a joke in the last 2 weeks that we were like, can we schedule the breakdown? Like, let's just schedule a specific day and a specific time when we're going to have our breakdown. We can have a big family cry, and that's when it will be. And what's funny is we kind of kept pushing it off. Like, is it today? No, it's not today. It's tomorrow. And but that was our way of kind of like, he would have those moments of going, I don't want to go. And I'm feeling all the feelings of what I'm leaving and the things that I'm going to miss. And I think, Jason, that was one of those things that we kind of had to just sit in the pocket of that for a second. You're going to hear me say that all the time, sit in the pocket. And I'm not going to apologize for saying that a lot, because I hope you actually adopt it, because I think one of the biggest things as military couples that we both do on both sides is we fail to sit in the pocket, okay, of our emotions and what's difficult, because so much of what we're going through is so hard that it feels like it's too much to process, right? It's too hard to process. And so when you're in that moment of feeling that weight of the emotions of what you're leaving, you don't want to sit in the pocket, because it feels like you're going to get lost there and you're going to get overwhelmed. It's the pocket, Jason, he's asking, is it pocket of mindfulness? It does take mindfulness, but I'm actually talking about sitting in the pocket of some of the tough emotions. It's sitting in the pocket of, I'm not necessarily saying negative emotions, because I'm not saying that we're kind of spiraling into this negative place. I'm saying that I think as military families, we run the risk of not feeling our emotions enough. Okay. There's two kinds of people. If I could simmer it down into like super simple language, like oversimplifying it, I would say there's two kinds of people. There is the person who sits in the pocket too much, like walking through the swamp. And that's what we're usually afraid of. We're going to be walking. It's like walking in rain boots through the swamp, where your boots are just getting stuck in the mud, right? And you just feel like it's taking so much effort to go step to step. And that's what I think we're afraid of sometimes, of sitting in that pocket of the negative emotions, the sadness, the guilt, the fear. And it's scary to go there, because if you go there, it is like, it's overwhelming. And by the way, those emotions, Matt and I were also talking about this. We had a date day out and we were talking about, like, we kept tearing up. It would come up and then we'd push it down. Right. And that's what I'm meaning. Like, we weren't sitting in the pocket of the feelings because we didn't want to like burst into open weeping. Right. And that's understandable. Like, there's a time and place for that. Right. But then we started talking about it and we were like, you know what? These are the same feelings of grief, right? These are the same feelings of grief. And most people who struggle with grief, which is a majority of human beings, we struggle with grief because we feel like we're going to feel the emotions and get stuck there, that they're going to be so overwhelming that we're never going to come out of it. And so that's the pocket that I'm talking about, Jason, of sitting in the pocket and not being afraid to process those feelings The key here is that we need to not live in the pocket of those feelings, right? And so grief is actually more like waves hitting a toddler, like ocean waves hitting a toddler. Whether it's the grief of losing someone, processing the grief of losing someone, maybe those of you who've lost service members and you deal with survivor's guilt. We have so many service members who have not processed that because we're afraid to tap into the emotions because it's going to be so overwhelming. We're going to get stuck there forever. When grief is actually more like overwhelming waves that are like hitting a toddler. To that toddler, those are big waves, right? And if you haven't been to the beach for a while, those waves are like every fourth wave is like the bigger one, right? And so sometimes waves are like, they're different in severity too. But the key here is to remember that you can have a wave of emotion hit you and then it subsides. And then that wave might hit you again, but then it subsides. And that happens previous to us separating too. And that's all it is. It's grief. It's losing the connection. It's losing the closeness. It's losing the nearness of the person that we're saying goodbye to. And that's why it's hard. It's hard because I love this person. I'm not wishing this on our family. It's just something that's happening to our family, and we have to figure out how to navigate through it. And so all those emotions have purpose. And so one of the things I kept thinking about was the only reason why I'm having all these emotions is because I love so much. And so so remember when I said there's one person that kind of sits in that pocket and really struggles to get out of it? You tend to be somebody maybe who sees all the negatives or sees all the problems, sees all of the stress of it all. And that's kind of like your baseline. And it's really hard for you to come out of that and see the good, right? Well, we have another kind of person that usually just skips over the surface. And I think that if I were to simplify it down, like we're one of those. So I'd love to hear in the chat, which one are you? Are you somebody that tends to kind of swim in the negativity and you have a hard time getting out of it? Or are you the kind of person that just would rather just see the positive of everything, maybe not tap into and process your feelings? That feels a little overwhelming or it feels overly negative. Tell me in the chat thread, which one do you lean towards? Because we all lean towards one or the other. I would say that I tend to be more of a optimist. And so I sometimes have to like force myself to kind of sit down and journal out all of my feelings, how I'm feeling, so that I can actually find my words and figure out like, what is it that I'm actually feeling here? And then I wouldn't say Matt is the pessimist, but he can tend to, because we kind of have learned to practice this on both sides, and we're getting better and better at it. So tell me in the chat thread, which one do you lean towards? A swimmer here. Shawnee, are you meaning more the swimming in the pocket? Swimming, is that what you're saying, rather than the skipping over? Let's see. Others swimming in the emotions. And interestingly enough, we marry our opposite, right? We tend to marry our opposite. Very true. Like an optimist sometimes will marry a pessimist. An introvert will tend to marry an extrovert. It's very true. Okay, so we're kind of keep them coming in. Keep them coming in. I was about to cry. Like I know I meant. Oh, okay. Brittany just got in. She was trying to register. That's what she was talking about. Okay. So as I was saying, I think that ripping the Band-Aid part is about being able to concentrate on recognizing that the emotions that we're having have purpose. I think that's one of the big things that I want you guys to take away today, is that if you're about to go through ripping that Band-Aid, or maybe you just did, being able to say, you know what, all of those emotions had purpose. Now I may process those emotions different from Matt. Matt channeled them into doing, executing, working around the house, because he even told me if I stop, I'm going to get overwhelmed and I'm going to feel it all and it doesn't feel productive. And so I'm just going to do what I can so that when I leave, I can feel like I did everything that I could. And that was me recognizing that's a different way for him to process emotions than for me. For me, interesting, since I tend to be the positive one, right? For me, I had to kind of sit still. I had to sit still and let him do those things for me to kind of slow myself and recognize what was happening, for me to process, okay, this is a big deal. This is hard, right? This is not something that I would wish upon what we're going through, but I'm going to allow myself, because I'm not afraid anymore, even though I don't want to feel that wave hitting me. I also want to be okay with the fact that this emotion that I'm experiencing right now means connection. So, Brene Brown, are you guys familiar with Brene Brown? Any Brene Brown fans out there? I know the USO has worked with Brene Brown in the past. Brene Brown says you cannot selectively one emotion without numbing them all. Okay. You cannot selectively numb one emotion without numbing them all. What that means is if you don't allow yourself to feel grief or feel sadness, or if you just don't want to feel anger, or if you want to just numb out the negative emotions, then that means you're going to rob yourself of the ability to also experience joy and connection. That those feelings that we are having leading up to that goodbye and ripping the Band-Aid, even that moment of ripping the Band-Aid, when you're like, here it comes, right? I got to actually say goodbye now, right? Again, there's lots of ways to say goodbye. There's, let's just do it and get it over with. There is, let's cry it out. And everybody has different ways of handling that. But if we try to numb it out all completely, then we're also somewhere in our life robbing ourselves of experiencing joy. And the only reason why we are having those emotions anyways is because we feel connection and love. And what better way for us to not only experience our own connection and love within ourselves, experience that within ourselves, to be able to go, I love this person. I don't want to do this, right? But even better for you to be able to express it, that person needs to hear it. Does that make sense, everybody? Does that make sense? Like being able to go to feel it and to express some level of it, even if it means I have tears running down my face. Because isn't that better in our family to see the connection on the face of the person standing in front of us than not, and just pretending like this isn't happening? So Brittany is saying, yes, that resonates. I'd love to hear from Jason, because I was kind of leaning on Jason a second ago on what that's like for the service member. And it's hard. And I think my message here is that it's hard because we love. Can we just kind of make that a theme for today? It's hard because this is difficult. It's not easy. Okay. There is more service members in here. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell me what I don't know. Tell me what I don't know. I remember when Matt dropped me off for that trip, he had to drop me off at Andrews Air Force Base. And when he and the boys left, I had a good cry. And then the Band-Aid was ripped. Like, it was excruciating getting up to that moment, right? But once we had that goodbye, it was time to shift focus, right? Sometimes, let's see, sometimes it's just easier to not sugarcoat it. So wherever you are, whether you're that person that swims kind of in the negativity or you skip over the surface, the goal here for both sides is to process and then move out of the pocket, right? Dip into that pocket, sit in that pocket for just a moment, and then come out, right? I had the chance to do a different talk about a week ago, and they were asking me to speak on gratitude. And at first, I had the opportunity to like do some digging. At first, when they asked me to speak on gratitude, can I just be honest with you guys that I was like, oh, gratitude? Like, what a terrible time for me to like have to do research on gratitude during pre-deployment tension and all of that. But of course, it was perfect timing. It was perfect timing. And I did this research. And here's what's amazing, guys. I found an expert on research, or I found an expert on gratitude. And you know what I found is that research shows, they've done all this research that shows that you cannot hold resentment and gratitude at the same time. You cannot hold them both. If you're leveraging gratitude, you cannot also be resentful. That is huge, because part of like ripping the Band-Aid and saying goodbye and acknowledging this unaccompanied tour, this training is, because I think there's service members out there that as much as they are looking forward to the mission, there is that split feeling of, I really wished that, I had a local job in the civilian sector right now, because all this was grand until I had to say goodbye to my family, right? There's some truth to that, right? That there can be right beforehand this feeling of, this is not something that I want to do, and maybe a little bit of resentment on both sides of, why do we have to do it? Okay. Let's see, Jason. Thank you, Jason. Thank you. Let's see. What you have described is my understanding of mindfulness. Stop being afraid of the feelings, feel them. Yes, it takes mindfulness. The spouse will appreciate it. It's absolutely vital that we are empathetically experience what the other is going through and is going through. That's probably the bedrock of maintaining a connection while separated. Absolutely. I wrote Sacred Spaces based off of that trip that I went on. And the whole book is about this role reversal on both sides. You get to hear a little bit from Matt's perspective. You get to hear a little bit from my perspective. And that's exactly what I went into that mission for. So I think this is a really good point for us to talk about after we rip that Band-Aid. How do we shift our focus, right? Because it is time to shift our focus. And that's what I needed to be able to do, to be able to look at that. Look who joined us, guys. I don't know if you guys can see this, but Matt has just joined the chat. And Matt, you need to be able to say it's for, make it for public for everybody. Instead of all panelists, you got to be able to say it is for all panelists and attendees. So he said it enables us to deeply appreciate those people we often take for granted. Okay. So part of that trip, hi, I just want to take a moment and say hello to my husband, who isn't here, but is here. So it wouldn't be the perfect webinar for him to not surprise us and for me to not also say hello. So see the smile that just came on my face? It's called connection, everybody. It is called connection. Okay, so here's the thing. That book that I wrote, and this is not a plug necessarily for the book, but I just want to say, I want to make a point to Jason's point that a lot of this is about empathy. It's about pausing for just a moment and being able to listen to your spouse's perspective that is very different from yours, right? And be okay with it being different from yours, that we're both going to express those feelings, and because we're about to go on two totally different adventures, right? And so we're going to have two totally different sets of emotions about that. Different kinds of fears, different kinds of excitement, different kinds of anticipations and expectations. And because of that, we need to be able to leverage empathy, which is the ability to sit in someone else's shoes and think for a moment, what is it like for that person to feel what they're feeling? And then out of that, give grace, right? To give grace somehow in that. So very good. Okay, so we're going to take a second and we are going to shift and talk about, all right, how do we get mission minded, right? Because I remember in my first deployment, I had wonderful mentors, and I'd love to hear from you guys. Tell me when you say goodbye, and this is going to be for the spouses, because I kind of leaned on these service members for just a second. I want to hear from you guys. How much time do you give yourself before you start to shift focus and create some new goals and get mission minded? Because as spouses at home, it's important for us to be mission minded too. You have a mission too, and your world doesn't stop just because they go on a mission that's very different, right? So I know when Matt has to leave, once he could say goodbye, he's mission focused, right? And it's very common for service members to kind of start checking out even way before that. You start to see them kind of checking out, readying themselves, because to Jason's point, you're living in two different places at once. I know we had another service member in here as well, so I hope I'm not missing any comments if you're another service member that's sharing. But you're in two different places. So sometimes you're going to be checked out and sometimes you're going to be very present. And sometimes you're going to be checked out and sometimes you're present. And as you get closer, you're kind of shifting your mind mission focused. And I know for Matt, it was a little bit easier to be able to just shift his perspective. As soon as that goodbye is there, right? He has to be on mission. That doesn't mean that he doesn't check in, right? Doesn't mean that he doesn't check in. Let's see. Matt says, mission-mindedness is fueled by beginning with the end in mind. What is our desired end state? What are the conditions we want to affect and change? Mission-mindedness is fueled by beginning with the end in mind. So if we're going to be mission-minded, right? We had so many conversations about this, he and I, in the last couple of weeks, talking about like, all right, I even remember this moment where I said, okay, we've been feeling all these emotions. What are we excited about? We've got to shift our focus, right? We sat in the pocket. Now we need to think about not just the positives, but what are we going to be about? And that's kind of, I think, what Matt's talking about. He's saying, what is the end in mind? where do we want to be? Who do we want to become? How do we want to grow? And that was one of the reasons why we were like, all right, let's talk about what we are excited about. And yes, we talked about the adventures on both sides. He talked about how his was a lot of that beginning with the end in mind. He talked about what he wanted to work on with the kids. And we'll get to that in just a minute. He talked about a lot of his mindfulness on wanting to self-development, the books that he wanted to read, the time he wants to get to work out. COVID kind of wrecked a lot of people's plans when it came to like physical fitness goals, right? And that's something that I know both he and I were excited about. So we started talking about like, where do we want to be in 6 to 9 months, even a year from now, past deployment, past this time of separation? Where is it that we want to be? Right? And who do we want to become, and who do we want to become together? And then backwards plan is what he's saying, right? Backwards plan. What's your desired end state? And then what do we need to do so that we actually reach those goals, right? So great. All right. So you guys are doing a great job in the chat thread. Let's see. Jason says, my struggle while gone has always been to resist saying, just make the mind, in reference to the kids. I need to recognize that she has 10,000 other things sucking away her energy. Great job, Jason. Good job of being able to be empathic, right? Let's see. Heidi, for me, it's 1 to 2 days. And for my service member, it's right after he leaves. Very good. Okay. So when I was talking about how much time does it take, right? Heidi's saying it takes her a couple days. And that's different too, right? So for the service member, as soon as we say goodbye, they can be on mission. Whereas I think for us back at home, it kind of like takes us a little bit, right? It takes us a little bit. I would agree that I tend to crash a little bit. I did in the last week have this thought that one of the things that I tried to do this time that I wasn't able to like stick with it, but it did make a difference when I tried. Okay. I started to think about what are the things that after he goes that makes me feel better, that what are the things that I'm looking forward to starting? Like I knew I wanted to get back to my physical fitness goals. I wanted to be able to have that alone time to be able to process my thoughts and journal and whatever. And so I started thinking about those things, and I had this thought like, why am I not doing that now on like some of the most difficult weeks when I probably really need those things, right? So I actually tried to implement this time a little bit better, those things that I knew that I was going to kind of create as my new routine. I tried to implement them before he even left. And that actually, especially the days I was able to do it, made a huge difference. And I remember having this kind of, I'm going to make a note of this, is what I said to myself. I'm going to make a note that this actually made my day better. And that if I can do this more, then it actually sets me hopefully up for more success after he goes, because I'm going to want to do it that much more. So that was helpful. But I do agree what actually ended up happening is that I crashed. I did crash because there's just so much emotion. And then I think for the spouses at home, especially if you have kids, I know that there are some that might be watching that don't have kids. Maybe you have a job, but kind of like life keeps going, right? Like you've got kids that need to get up the next day. You've got like dinner you got to think about. There are things that you've got to be able to process. And then, things you've got to execute still. And so there really is no way to just kind of like, for them, I think there's a lot of sitting and waiting and traveling and rest that can happen. And I think that can be a little bit more difficult for the spouses back at home, especially if they have kids, to get that necessary rest in, especially when emotionally you've been through something so much. And then I think we need to give ourselves that time to crash. Okay, so tell me, just for a minute, what sabotages. What are some lessons learned? I'm going to pull from some of the wisdom in the room here. What are some lessons learned that you have learned to not do after you've ripped that Band-Aid? Those of you who need to crash, or those that are mission focused and service members, tell me what you have learned to not do that first week. What was not helpful? Honor your spouse in these comments here. So don't talk only for yourself. Okay. But what has not worked that you said, okay, I'm not going to do that again? Or maybe you learned from somebody else that is definitely not good for you for that first week. So for me, I know just completely binging, a little bit of binging is okay on ice cream or whatever, but I know overdoing it is not worth it. I've learned that lesson. So what has been something for you guys? And I think there's a little bit of that ripping the Band-Aid on the other side where you're like, okay, like we crossed the finish line. I'm going to give myself that grace to just have that ice cream. You know, for me, it's popcorn. Like I could totally binge on popcorn. I'm a salt person. Tell me eating too much ice cream, watching too many series on Netflix, like completely checking out. I'm hearing that as something that you've learned to not do. Let's see, I have another one. Let's see, squashing your feelings too much, being ungrateful. Tell me those things in the first week, because then we're going to shift it, right? We're kind of sitting in the pocket here for a second, and then we're going to shift it to actually what works. Bottling everything up is terrible. Let's see what else we have. Give me a second. I'm reading through them. You guys are doing great. Keep it coming in. Okay. So I think Jason is also saying, which brings up a really good point. Sometimes if we just take off and hit the ground running, it can also not be good. Like you still kind of have to like sit in that a little bit. I could actually see on both sides, making yourself overly busy and not slowing down. And maybe that's about acknowledging. I think that's something that I needed to do better, is that, it's really easy to keep yourself busy and not acknowledge that you just went through something really, really challenging that most people in the world or our culture don't have to go through. Like how many civilians, I mean, there's lots of civilians out there that have jobs that are traveling. We have lots of families that are contractors that kind of have deployments, right? So there are other people that go through similar things. But I think it's really hard when you're talking about longer stints of time. Our brain it just cannot comprehend how is it that we're saying goodbye to this person we don't want to say goodbye to for a really long time. It just doesn't make sense. And so it's not like that we're actually losing that person. That person isn't dying, right? We're just saying goodbye for a period of time. And so it kind of mixes things up, but it's really easy to just kind of fill that time afterwards with busyness and ignore what you just went through, when sometimes you have to pause and acknowledge, even if you don't feel it yet, that you just went through something that was really long and drawn out, unless you're one of those who had like a rapid response deployment, that acknowledging this was like borderline traumatic to my emotions, right? Like this was a big deal. We went through something really intense, whether we wanted to acknowledge it or not. And I need to give myself some time. I need to give myself some time. How much time do you give yourselves? And there's no wrong answer on this. How much time do you give yourselves? I know my first deployment, I gave myself like 2 weeks. I think the second, and I had young kids at the time, I think that was realistic. 2 weeks, not to be like in bed all day. But it was more like, I'm going to give myself 2 weeks to not set some extreme goals, just to slow down a little bit. I think this one, I have, I'm giving myself a good week or so. Tell me how often 2 weeks to get a reset, is what some of you are saying. How many of you guys, I know one from above said 1 to 2 days to kind of, and I think don't you think it's a process for everybody, right? Just like for the service member, when you are, when you're traveling, there's lots of ways to travel, right? Depending on what branch you're in, but there's these phases of travel before you like even get to your destination. And once you get to your destination, then there is that adjustment and the assimilation into the group that you're going to be with. And then finding those, battle buddies, those friends, who you're going to align yourselves with, for support. Matt says 2 weeks in quarantine for him this time, which is a whole other level of like how COVID has impacted all of this, right? Maybe 2 weeks is actually the more like appropriate of what we should actually give ourselves. But I think that's kind of what I'm saying here, is that for both sides, there has to be kind of this transition time, right? So maybe just like the service member has like a day of traveling here, then the second day of different kind of traveling here. And then there's like all these different kinds of elements. And then there's the adjustment, there's phases. Maybe for the spouses back at home, we need to give ourselves some phases to go through too, right? Instead of going either I'm jumping into my new mission mindset, which we're going to be transitioning here soon into that. but maybe we go through phases. You give yourself 24, 48 hours to crash in whatever way is appropriate, depending on if you have kids to take care of and all that. And then you kind of transition into, okay, now I'm going to like, but I think it's important that we do this in advance. You've got to think about this in advance. If you live on accident, things aren't going to get done and it's not going to go the way that you need it to go. I think you have to go into this intentionally and go, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give and it can adjust. It can adjust just like the service member, like hurry up and wait. You know, planes take off at odd times and then you're going and then you're not going and you're sitting around, like things are changing, right? But you can still have, this is what I'm going to do for myself until I have the next little bit of information. Let's see. Matt, you're going to have to expand on the storming, forming, or norming. I know you use that a lot, but expand on what you mean and tying it in. Okay, so let's see. Brittany says, I like that Jason said, 14 days, and who thought 14 days in a Marriott could be so bad? Mental note, those of you service members who have to go through 2 weeks of quarantine, make your mental notes that when you come home, right? Obviously, depending on what's happening with COVID, we want to stay safe, but a couple of days in a hotel of sleeping goes a long way. Matt did that for me on a first deployment and it was huge. So make note when you're in quarantine. All right. Brittany says, it's taking me a long time to realize that something traumatic happened and it's possible to be strong. And then boom, you crash, you go through it. I'm fine. And now, okay. All right. So acknowledge it. Give yourself a couple days to acknowledge it. Take care of yourself, self-care, sleep, eating as best as you can. Give yourself some time. And then maybe the next phase that you proactively plan in advance is, what am I going to do after that 48 hours, right? What are you going to do with the kids? How are we going to just turn things a little bit more intentional? Doesn't mean you have to go start training for a marathon then, right? But it can mean we're going to circle the wagons as a family. One of the things that we plan to do with the kids, that I plan to do with the kids, is sitting down with them within the first couple weeks and sitting down and going, okay, what do each of you need? Now I have older kids, they're teenagers, but I think you can do this with small kids too, is being able to go, all right, let's see, what can I talk with my kids about and go, what do you need? What do you need? And what do I need? How can I help you get what you need? So if I have a kid that's like, I really just need to check out a little bit and not think about it, that's good to know, right? I asked my kids this morning, like, what do you need tonight to look like, right? So, and I'm going to try to do that for the first couple of weeks. What do you need today to look like? Now, my kids can take advantage of that and go, video game time. That's what I need. And you know what? This is a grace period. And so we might be a little bit more relaxed as long as we're taking care of schoolwork and all of those kinds of things, to offer that grace. But the point here is that we have these phases that we go through that help us evolve to the place where we can then be on mission. Does that make sense? Right? So I think spouses especially need to work a little bit more on what is your proactive plan to, especially those of you who are the personality that are going to kind of sit in the pit, right? That sit in the pocket too much. Because if you're not careful, some of you can kind of get stuck in the negativity, and some of you struggle with that loneliness. Some of you struggle with the negativity of it. And then if we're not careful, we get stuck there and we build a house there. And then we're not experiencing joy and connection in our life. So we have to proactively plan. Goes back to that gratitude that I was meaning before. How am I going to now shift focus and actually leverage gratitude to shift focus into a better place where I'm now going to be on mission? Okay. All right. Let's see. So a couple of you guys had said it takes you a couple days. It takes you, now I want to hear, those of you who are either in a deployment, we kind of touched on this briefly in the last webinar, but now I want to hear from you guys. What is your mission mindset? Because I think that you have to have, like Matt and I talked about in the beginning, being able to go, what is it that we're looking forward to? What is it that we're going to do? And then being able to decide for ourselves, like, when do we start that? Like, I know one of the things that Matt said as he was walking out the door was that he was going to start then doing his best to eating healthy because he was ready to kind of start doing that. I'm wondering how that's going traveling, because finding healthy food is definitely difficult, but that's part of the adjustment, right? The point is that you have the goal and that you have the intention, and then you can adjust as you need to go. So we already have some missions coming in. Share with me your missions, because I'm learning from you guys. I want to hear your missions. Okay, Shawnee, I'm gonna challenge you, and I know that you're just be joking, but there's so many out there that would give that answer of my mission is survival, right? So I know that you're just joking on that because you've got LOL on there, right? But I'm going to challenge you for the sake of everybody else that might be listening, even those that are listening after this is not live anymore and it's recorded. I want to hear from you. Dig a little deeper and tell me, see if you can expand on either what your mission has actually become or what you want it to become. How can you see your time as, even during COVID, those of you who are listening right now who are, we're all impacted by COVID. I'm hoping someday someone will listen to this recording and it won't be COVID anymore, but it's a good chance it's going to stick around for a while. So let's talk about that for a second. For so many people, it can feel like survival, right? It can feel like just waiting for everything to happen to us. And deployment, trainings, unaccompanied tours, geobatching even can feel like this is just stuff that's happening to us. COVID feels like it's happening to us. Matt wouldn't have to be in a 2-week quarantine if there wasn't COVID. It's this external thing that is happening to us, right? And so if we're not careful, we are going to be focused on that negativity of just surviving what is happening to us instead of the mindset starting with the end in mind, like Matt said, and instead deciding, all right, there are some things that are happening to me, but what am I going to do to now shift my focus and be grateful for what I do have? This is where the gratitude piece comes in, because they found in this research that gratitude actually makes you more stress resistant. Notice it did not say resilient. I really am against that word. If you know me, you know that by now. I really don't like resilient, because resilient, the definition of resilient is to bounce back. I don't know about you. I don't want to bounce back to what I was before. Like I'd rather bounce forward to something new that's hopefully better, right? So I want to bounce forward. That's why I don't like resilient. It just sounds like just get over it, right? But this research actually said that you can be more stress resistant, that people recovered from stress faster and they recovered from trauma faster when they practiced gratitude. Now, again, note that I am saying that gratitude is not slapping a Band-Aid on it, like skipping over the surface, like we talked about, and just being positive about everything and not paying attention to our emotions, because our emotions equal connection, right? We don't want to numb those out. So we've got to be able to process our emotions in a healthy way, and then we leverage gratitude. Do you see the difference? So I love that, Brittany. Step back, reflect, and reframe. So good, right? So good. So you've got to be able to process it and leverage gratitude, and it actually makes you more stress resistant because, again, you can't hold resentment and gratitude at the same time. And we can leverage the gratitude to help us make our new goals. So I'm going back to you, Shawnee, if you're still with us, and tell me, what can be your mission? What can we be grateful for? I am grateful for the time I get with my kids. I am grateful for the time that I get to spend having dinner with them every night. And so that means I can leverage that and turn that into my mission. My mission can be the tabletop conversations. There's these cards that you can get on Amazon. I will make sure to send the link out to it, but there's these tabletop questions, like dinner time questions, that you can just like pull out a card, and it's conversation starters that you can do with your kids. That can be part of your mission. That my mission, given my circumstances, this thing that is happening to me, I'm going to choose to be grateful for the things that I can see. And instead, I am going to focus on building my relationship with my kids and making that deeper. Make sense? Thank you, Laura. Oh, that was perfect timing. She put tabletopics.com is where you can get that. Let's see. Some of you are saying, sometimes, depending on the situation, survival is the right size goal. Level of experience, one's perspective, available resources, all determine whether you should reach higher. Many times we grow when we don't realize we are doing so. The survival goal 2 years ago enables a better goal now. Love that. Love that so much. Yes. Some of you, and I kind of reference Maslow's ladder a lot. I love Maslow's ladder because I think it's huge for military families, because Maslow's ladder was, just very briefly, it's just a theory of how we develop as human beings and how we reach our higher purpose and having a sense of peace in our life and being able to see our full potential. Okay. Maslow said we are all striving for that. But what he saw was that we have these different levels of needs, and he calls it the hierarchy of needs, right? And he's the very bottom rung of the ladder is physiological needs that we all need: food, shelter, sleep, sex is in there. And there's one other one in there, but we need a roof over our heads. That's why when we PCS, right, it pushes us to that very bottom rung of the ladder, right? And so we kind of have to work our way up. The next one, by the way, is routine, right? Routine and structure. And I think that when we find ourselves saying goodbye and ripping the Band-Aid, we're kind of shoved to that ladder, that ladder rung of structure and safety and needing security, that I can do this, you can do this, and we can do it from here and there, right? And so we're trying to figure out our new routine and our new structure. And so there are going to be times in COVID and your health, and or if you're going through a medical scare, there are going to be times that you're going to find yourself in that survival place and at that bottom rung of physiological needs. And some of you who have very, very small children, like the biggest thing you need right now is a nap, right? You just need a nap, and that feels like survival. And I felt like at that time, that was my survival of that season. And so you are right that there are times that you've got to be able to just survive, and that's what matters. However, I think that there are times that we need to be able to survive that moment and then pull ourselves out of that pocket and then leverage that gratefulness. And again, I know I'm using gratitude here, guys. And again, before I did this research, I was like, that is such an overly simplified, easy way to just slap some positivity on there, and it's not real. Like, I totally understand that that's what it may come across to you guys. And I'm telling you, I am not usually that person. But I have to pay attention to research when it comes out. And if it says that you cannot hold gratitude and resentment at the same time, that means to me, if I also am paying attention to Brene Brown's research that says you cannot selectively numb one emotion without numbing them all, then that means that gratitude can also be the answer for sadness. It can also be the answer for loss. It doesn't mean it replaces it. Maybe that's what a lot of people think gratitude is that we're just ignoring it and replacing it. That's not what it means. It means we're shifting our focus. We're processing, shifting our focus. And then we're going to find ourselves back there like waves hitting a toddler. And then we shift our focus. It's a tool. Think of it like a tool. Okay. All right. So I want to hear more about your missions. What are your missions that you are facing forward on? I know Matt and I definitely did talk about then in just a minute, I would love to transition if there's questions. If you guys have actual questions, we're trying to pay attention to some of the questions that you guys put in your registrations as well. So I'll try to get some of those, even if they're a little bit off topic. Brian says that they tried a daily gratitude board, but the kids resented doing it. Brian, I just want to say, you know what? Modeling for our kids, we may not realize what they pick up along the way, right? So being able to model it, even if your kids aren't totally into it, they're still picking up on some things. It's giving that level of grace with your kids and just being able to say, like, this may not be totally for you. I'm not going to force it on you. But it is something that we're going to try to practice. So don't underestimate, as long as we're not forcing and over-regulating our kids, but introducing them to this tool all the time is definitely helpful. Okay. All right. Let's see. Some of you have, Brittany says she has a positivity jar. I think that's great. I've seen that work during deployments as well. So you're welcome, Brian. You're welcome. Okay. So let me hear some of your mission. How do we stay on mission? Okay. I want to hear a little bit more about being able to, I want to hear from the service members what your mission is and how do you stay on mission? Because we have some great service members that are here with us today. What do you do to be mission minded and still connecting back at home? Because I hear that as a concern a lot from spouses at home, that everybody's different, right? Everybody's marriage is different. Sometimes you have a couple that's very engaged, very involved, very present, conversations, and our technology is better than ever. I mean, here's a perfect example. Matt is joining us from wherever, whereas before we would not have had this technology. And so technology is much different, but we still have a lot of couples who struggle with that connection where the service member, and some of them are, I'm not talking about those that have where you cannot call home, where there's OPSEC reasons that you can't connect back at home. I'm not talking about those kind of examples, but we do have a lot of couples that struggle with being able to stay mission focused, and they don't want to connect back at home because either it's too hard, or they don't know what to say, or they don't know how to do it in a way that is productive. So I want to hear from the service members for just a minute about how do you proactively think about being mission minded and staying focused on what you need to focus on wherever you are, and still stay connected back at home. And then I'm going to read this comment here. Carrie said that, going back to the gratefulness, that after she listens to her kids and gives them a chance to acknowledge their feelings, she then asks them to tell her what they're grateful for. That's a great idea. I'm going to leverage that. Thank you, Carrie. I'm definitely going to do that at the table. I had some, I think I mentioned this last time, but I had another person give me an idea where, like, every Thursday night for them was gripe night, where you get to complain and share whatever it is that you need to, and you're not going to get in trouble for your feelings, kind of thing. Great chance to decompress. And I think it's also, can I just say this to that point, that it is okay for your kids to see your emotions during all of this. Again, we don't want to swim in the swamp. We don't want to swim in that pocket forever. We need to model for our kids that we can have feelings and then pull ourselves out of those feelings. But it's really good and important for your kids to see that you have emotions too about all this on both sides. The kids need to see from the service members the emotion of you missing them, even if that's tearful. Again, tears are connection. We don't need to push them down all the time. And that gives them permission to have feelings too. So don't be afraid to show some of those feelings. All right, Shawnee, let's see. She was the one that mentioned survival, so she's coming back. So she's got a second grader surviving virtual school. I hear you. I'm totally understanding surviving school dynamics right now is incredibly difficult. She has a 4-year-old also, though. Having patience for your kids, working on fitness, slowly doing a task a week, and then back to work in January. And so, yes, thank you for being able to also share what your mission is. That's what I'm reading that as. So you have this survival thing. And sometimes if we have too big of a mission that we've planned, we put ourselves into a place of survival, right? I was having a session with someone this morning where we were talking about that. Like, we were talking about, what's your new mission? How are you going to be mission minded? And there were so many things on her plate, and she was taking on so many things with the kids too, that there was no way for her to actually succeed at the mission, right? So we had to kind of revamp it. We had to talk about, like, is this a realistic mission? What can we adjust here? What can the kids take on in responsibility? What can you let go of? What can you say no to, so that your mission actually succeeds and you don't feel like you're surviving, right? So there are some kinds of survival that we put ourselves into that place. I know, and Matt could attest on here, that I have successfully put myself in places where I found myself surviving, and it was because of decisions I made, right? So we can do that to ourselves. Let's see. Heidi says, my husband said that whatever happens at home affects his mindset during the deployment. Getting constant updates via emails or phone calls helps. Thank you, Heidi. We're going to come to that. I'm going to circle back to that in just a minute. Is it Maria? Says her husband is going to be gone when your first baby is born, helping you deal with those different stages. Yes, I'm going to try to come back to that. Laura, if you will make a note that I don't forget that question, I will come back to that. Let's see. Matt says, mindset that excellence in my vocation provides for my family. And okay, so this is Matt's mindset. All right, so this is what I ask service members. What is your mindset? Like, how do you focus on the mission and still stay connected? This is what Matt said. This is especially for those who listen to this recorded later, who can't see the chat. He said his mindset is that his excellence in his vocation provides for his family, and that healthy boundaries for a family investment model what others need is what others need to see from a leader. So that's what he's telling himself. He's saying that by me going and doing this and being excellent at it, not only provides for his family, so that's one way that he's staying connected and he's reminding himself, and he reminded us of this a lot. And he really vision cast this for our boys before he left. He sat us down actually and did what I would call a briefing, which we actually enjoyed. But being able to say, here's what I'm going to do. Here's why I'm going to have to do it. Here's the role that I'm playing. And he did this on a kid appropriate level. And he cast vision so that they could understand where he was going. They could ask questions of like, to the best of his knowledge, what was his living conditions going to be like? Here's what was very interesting. My oldest son, who is remembering back to our first deployment, we didn't know this until Matt was casting vision and asking, do you have any questions about where I'm going and what it's going to be like? We had no idea. Our son doesn't remember a whole lot of the other deployments when he was small, but he actually was remembering a picture, we think, because a lot of kids don't remember those big chunks of time when they're really, really tiny. So that's an encouragement to those of you who have small children, that they won't remember a lot of the day-to-day tough stuff of the deployment the way that you're remembering it. But he's remembering a picture that he saw of Matt during a deployment in Afghanistan that was in the mountains. And so his 16-year-old brain was thinking that Matt was going to be going to live like on the cliff at the edge of on a mountain, on an edge of a cliff, which is so not at all what deployment was or what it's going to be, right? But because Matt sat down and cast vision, he was able to then paint a better picture for the family so the kids could picture it differently. And Matt is now saying he's using that, that this provides for my family. And he told that to the kids too. This is how we get to do the things that we get to do. And it has some really kind of sucky parts, right? There's some sucky parts of this lifestyle, but here's the things that we're grateful for. Notice the gratitude in that. This provides for my family. Let's see. Healthy boundaries for a family investment model, what others need to see from a leader. Okay, so what he's saying is, I think, Matt, what you're saying is that you're also going to be going over there and modeling how to not only stay connected with the family back at home, that's important, and hopefully modeling that for other people. But that we can also, that it's okay to separate. Matt and I also talked about this too, that it's okay to separate and use this time to think about how it resets us in our marriage, and it can reset some things in the family too. So this is really kind of revolutionary, I think, for us as a couple, is that going into this as a mission, I found myself, it had been a while, honestly, since Matt had deployed. And so I found myself overly dependent, I think, sometimes on him. And he cast vision even for me that this was a time for me to kind of find that confidence again in some things that I needed to find some confidence in. It sets those boundaries for us to work on some things that even are just our communication. Like when you're around each other all the time, you start taking for granted handwritten notes or flirting with each other over text or over letters, or you kind of just like shift, your focus shifts after a while. So it gives you guys a chance to reset that. And so part of our mission mindedness as a together goal is, all right, what could we work on in our marriage that we haven't really worked on for a while because we've been in close proximity for a long time. So that's really good. Okay. Thank you, Matt, for that. Kristen, making goals separately and together throughout the time I'm gone helps a lot. Personally, ensuring the goal at work is top priority, and making myself a goal can be a few small steps and a large one. Let's see. We also have so they're reading a book together. It's a 365 daily read by Dr. Caroline Leaf. Thank you for that resource. Great book that you can read and you can journal on or just read, and has small brain activations. So you can almost take these books like this and work on them as a family, right? So you can stay connected on the mission. You can stay connected on being excellent, like Matt said. You can do all these things because it's the right thing to do, but finding those intentional things that you can do with back at home will not only give you the discussion starters, but will also give you like something to say other than what'd you do with your day, right? You have a plan going into your conversations. I do want to speak to what somebody said earlier about how much information you're getting through emails, where I'm trying to remember who it was that said, Heidi had said getting constant updates and emails helps a lot. I hear service members say different things. I would say when I went overseas and I interviewed the service members over there and asked, like, what do we need to know back at home? Like, what is it that we don't understand that you wish that we did understand? And one of the great things I got from them was they love getting these updates, right? I remember when Matt sent me on my trip, he was like, I'm not going to flood you with too much information so you can stay on mission, right? And what do you know? Within 24 hours, he had sent me a long email of everything that happened. But you know what? When I got to that point, I needed it. I needed to know what was happening. It calmed me. It actually helped me read through it, then go be on mission. And the great thing about an email is I was able to come back and reread it and see some of the things that I might have missed because I was maybe anxious that I needed to get out the door that day. So, but what they said to me overseas was that please don't send us information that makes us feel powerless, right? If you're going to give us information about a problem, it's, you know, it makes them feel even more detached and more distant if there's a problem and they can't do anything about it, right? So one of the things that translated into was, how do we give information of, like, I had a really bad day, but this is what I did. I reached out to a friend, I was able to call for support or whatever, right? I know I was personally ill last night. And so I needed support and I needed to have a friend go and pick up my son from work. You know, being able to tell Matt, yeah, I'm not feeling well, but here's what I'm going to do about it, hopefully made a difference for him to know, like, it's not a helpless feeling. He's just getting an update. He doesn't have to worry. He doesn't have to try to jump into solving a problem from a distance because I gave him the solution that I was going to do. Okay. All right. You guys are doing so great. So great. Okay. Again, if we have questions, be sure to ask questions. You guys are talking so much, I'm going to have a hard time catching up with you. Notice there's also a Q&A box that if you want to ask a private question or make sure I don't miss a question, use the Q&A box so that it doesn't get lost in the chat. So be sure to use that as well. Give me a second. Let me catch up a little bit here. Let's see. We're talking about... somehow we got into a conversation about daddy dolls. Let me catch up here. Okay. I think it is staying connected, probably staying connected, gives the kids a chance to be able to stay connected through some of those tools are fantastic. I know for those of you who are looking for ideas, Build-A-Bear is wonderful, where you can have a recording of the service member talking into that recording and stuff it in a teddy bear, and they can squeeze the button and hear their voice. Again, we have great technology now. Don't underestimate the power of the 5 senses. Okay, so the 5 senses. So yes, we don't have touch or taste, right, when we're talking about trying to connect as a family from a distance, but we do have hearing and sight in technology. Okay, so being able to see each other, hear that voice, the more of your 5 senses that you pair together, the more we create positive memories. So while the Build-A-Bear is great because I can hear the voice, right, those are great for all the time. But obviously what's even better is a video chat like this, where your children can actually hear and see their parent. Okay, let's see. And then I'm going to get back to that question. Let me know if you have other questions coming in. Again, we're talking about ripping the Band-Aid, saying goodbye, going through that dip of, like, how do you do your self-care? How do you take care of yourself? Are you giving your spouse permission to have a different kind of way that they get on mission? And then of course we want our service members to stay connected, right? Be on mission, but at some point we need to have a plan for staying connected. And then on the supporting spouse side, it is, how do we give ourselves a chance to crash and do some good self-care, right? I think that's the challenge for spouses. How do I have good, healthy self-care for myself and not keep putting myself on the back burner without kind of going into the pocket and living there, and giving myself a proactive plan to get out of that and then make some of my own personal goals so that I'm actually moving forward. So we've talked about ripping the Band-Aid. We've talked about why that's hard. We've talked about sitting in the pocket of our emotions, the importance of gratitude and helping us get out of that. And how we can use gratitude to help us be on mission and discover, like, what is it that I can look forward to, and what is it that I can set some new goals on based off of what I do have instead of what I don't have. Let's see. Let's see. Some of you have tried Build-A-Bear before. That's great. Let's see. I feel like my daughter is stuck in the wave. How can I help her climb out of the pocket? Oh, that's a great question, Shawnee. Okay. And great question, Jason. How old is she? Okay. So she's 8 years old. So developmentally, there's different things we can do. Sometimes I think, first of all, we have to remember on both sides, but this is especially to, I'm going to say the moms out there, but dads, you need to hear this too, that it's really important that we don't take our brain and put it in our child's brain as if what they're feeling is the same thing we're feeling. We have an adult brain with a frontal cortex that is fully developed, which means we have the ability to think into the future. We have the ability to be able to think into the future and go, I know after a good night's rest, I'm going to feel better. Our kids don't have that experience yet. They don't have the frontal cortex developed yet. So when they are swimming in that pocket, when they're being hit by that wave, it can feel overwhelming and they don't know when is this feeling going to end because their frontal cortex isn't developed. They can't be able to say after a good night's sleep, it's going to get better. Okay. So I think it's being able to help her first acknowledge the feelings. 8 years old is a great time to go ahead and start journaling. There's different ways you can do this. You can give her a journal where she just talks, writes out her feelings and then shares them with you when she wants to. You can also do a thing where even as eight, like they're not going to write 2 pages, right? But they might do a paragraph. It also works really well to have like a spiral notebook that's kind of like a journal where she can write her feelings and then she kind of leaves that notebook. She brings it to you, or she can leave it on your bed, or it's kind of this transition spot where then you can write a response and send it back. Like I'm not talking about the deployed spouse. I'm talking about you even at home, that you can pass this back and forth to each other. It introduces her to learning how to find her words and acknowledge her emotions. That's number one. Okay. So it doesn't matter if you're an introvert or an extrovert. It's just how we process information. Extroverts need to talk it out. Introverts need to think on it and find their words. Journaling actually helps both because extroverts are still trying to, yes, they do better when it's conversation, but the downfall for extroverts is they say all the negative stuff first and before they get to the productive stuff. And so journaling helps both find their words. And so this is a great time before you even know where is she developmentally for her to start finding her words. And you can even write back and forth or have conversation around that. So that's number one. It's kind of the same process that you can. Are there things her and dad specifically can? Yes. Thank you, Jason, for giving some great advice. So being able to sit in the pocket of her emotions, process them, and then we can leverage the gratefulness. So you can help her redirect. Okay. So like Jason is saying, there's definitely things that you want to help her take those emotions, acknowledge. I had to do this with my 13-year-old today, that he felt his emotions. We talked about those emotions. We talked about, because he was like, we were talking about how, yes, we want to be able to look forward to things and be mission minded, but we also need to also feel our feelings of missing daddy, right? Yes, absolutely. We're not trying to ignore those feelings, Shawnee. So her feeling those feelings means that she misses, I'm assuming it's her father, but she's missing that parent, right? So that's teaching them, even at that young age, it's okay for you to have these feelings. You're feeling connected. And that piece is missing right now. So it's understandable that you're going to have those feelings, and anytime you have them is okay. What we want to teach them, though, is that they do have control of redirecting, and we can start teaching them the techniques to redirect into a productive place where she can turn that into a letter to her parent, her deployed parent, or a video works great for an 8-year-old. She can do a video of talking to the parent and saying how much I miss you and all the things that she did this day, and then, send that video. So there's lots of creative ways we have now, technology wise, where we can share that in a productive way where she feels like she's making that connection, or writing it out and then reading it to, I'm assuming, dad, in a later call, right? And then we can redirect. So the key here is, after we feel the feelings, those are good feelings to have, and then we redirect to a place of gratitude, right? I know I had to redirect my child who was saying, but it's going to be, he said like a year, without Matt, without daddy. And it turned out like, well, it's not looking like it's going to be a year. So let's actually that's catastrophic thinking that kids do. So the redirect was, it is painful and it does feel like it's going to be forever. And that's part of the kids like processing this, right? This feels like it's going to be forever. The good news is it's not going to be forever. The clock is going to keep ticking. We are just going to focus on today and what we need to get through today. So what do you need to get through today? And then you transition her into, what are you excited about today? What are you looking forward to today? What helps you feel better today? The fact that you're missing daddy, and then we can still miss daddy, and we're also still able to have good experiences too today. And it's okay, just because we have a moment where we're not sad about daddy doesn't mean that we're not still missing daddy. Does that make sense? Because there are some kids out there that might translate that to going, okay, like, just because I didn't miss him for 10 minutes because I was focusing on this show doesn't mean that I don't miss him at all. Does that make sense? It's teaching your kids, what are these emotions and how do I feel them appropriately and productively? And so it's good for them to understand that these waves, just because the wave goes away, doesn't mean that I don't miss my dad. Does that make sense? Kids don't understand that. So we tend to put our brain in their brain and we think they know that, and they don't. They just know they're feeling a lot right now, and that's overwhelming. It's our job as parents to teach them what to do with that emotional flooding, how to channel it in a really productive way, which means you both have to know how to channel your own emotions in productive ways. If you're pushing down and repressing them, you won't be able to teach your kids how to manage them. If you are swimming in the swamps of sadness and you're not managing them, you're not going to know how to teach your kids how to manage them. You have to start with yourself first. And thank you for Brittany mentioning counseling is definitely a great idea for helping kids. Telehealth is great for kids right now. In fact, because of COVID, there's so much telehealth happening. Counselors are now able to do telehealth counseling with kids that are in school. The kids can go to the guidance counselor's office and do their telehealth session from the guidance counselor's office. I highly recommend that if your kids need it, connect them with a counselor, even telehealth wise, during the deployment. Okay? Great time to be proactive. Don't wait for there to be a problem. Be proactive and say, you know what? Maybe I'm going to get counseling too, just to have the place to learn how to process my emotions and get back on mission. Okay. Let's see. I need to be able to find, some of the questions that you guys have brought up. You guys have been amazing. We have a little bit more time today. Tell me what we need to cover about how to stay on mission, finding your mission. You need to have individual goals. You need to have couple goals. If you have kids, you need to have family goals. Like I said, my personal goals, Matt shared his. My personal goals are to build my relationships and deepen my relationship with my boys now that they're teenagers. This is a great time for me to they've been kind of leaning on dad for a while. And so I'm taking advantage of this time to build my relationship with them in a deeper way. And then I know our couple goals is Matt and I plan to better our communication and do some things, communicate in some ways that we haven't been for a while. And then our family goals is, I know Matt's going to be making he wanted to do some more devotional kind of stuff, some vision casting, investing in their kind of spiritual side of things. He's going to be doing that over the next, over the deployment. And so that's something that he said he wanted to work on with the boys. But also, he even said to me before he left, he was like, I hope that you will include me on some of the decisions and helping with the kids. And of course I'm going to do that. But I think we just needed to acknowledge that as a couple. Like, I'm not going to just shelter him completely, and he needed to know how to do that. Okay. How do you keep good communication and work on your marriage when dealing with these first few days, these first few months? Okay. How do you keep good communication and work on your marriage when dealing with these first few? Okay. So the first few days, I love how it was the first few days and then months, right? I think the first few days, I think we just need to go back to crashing and giving some grace that we're probably not going to be at our 100% best communication in those first few days. And so I think part of it is communicating as a couple to each other that I may not be at my best right now, but I'm doing the best I can. So if I'm a little quieter than usual, I know I had to say that to Matt. I had to tell him, like, I told him a couple times, just because I'm being really quiet doesn't mean I'm not feeling it and processing it. It's actually, I am processing it internally. I just need to make sure I tell you the words that I come up with, right? If I stay forever quiet, that's not going to be good. But I wanted him to not misread my quiet side, right? It was actually my sadness, and I'm paying attention to that sadness. So I kind of sit in that pocket and acknowledge I'm about to lose my person for a little while, right? At least the nearness of him. And so, as far as the first few months starting on that communication, number one, proactively plan as much as you can. I don't know if we still have Matt joining us. He may have had to duck out. And so, if he's not able to communicate with us, I'm giving him permission to jump in and help answer these if he's still here. But if not, that's understandable, right? So, I think proactively having a plan as a couple, where you say, how are we going to work on our communication? So, don't forget, communication means connection. All right. When we say I need to work on our communication, it's usually we just want a better connection. And that means both of you have to talk about what is it? What kind of communication makes me feel connected? Because if we just say I want to communicate better, one spouse may hear that as just talking more. And the other person might be meaning, no, I need to have more in-depth emotional conversations. Or somebody else might be saying, I want to have intellectual conversations about what's happening in the world. And that's connection for them. So I think we need to talk about being able to say, what is connection? What is good, healthy communication for you so that your spouse knows how to win and get it right? Okay. So being able to actually say, I think proactively, if possible, whether it's over email or over the phone or over Skype or whatever, to be able to say, I would like to once a week at least have a longer conversation with you where we're emotionally connecting or intimately connecting, or where we are, maybe those are the times we're talking about what's going right or wrong or whatever at the house, and being just more specific. I think you have to be a little bit more intentional on the kind of communication, if that makes sense. But have a project that you're working on together, a book maybe that you're reading together. Have don't be ashamed or afraid to have some of those table topics as discussion starters. Have a list of questions that you can go into those phone calls with when you have extra time, not talking when they're about to go out on a mission and they're on a hurry, okay? Or when somebody's exhausted. But being able to have discussion pointers when we have a chance. Another thing that Matt and I talked about, we were on a walk to answer this question. And one of the questions was, or one of the things we talked about was, I told him, I said, if you could just let me know, because I have a tendency to do like a brain dump with him. Anybody else in marriage do a brain dump? I do see the question in the Q&A box, by the way, just so that I see it. Those of you who do like brain dumps, like it used to be when Matt would come home from work, I would just do a brain dump on catching him up on everything that happened during the day. Not saying that that's an effective strategy at all. But I told him on our walk, once he's gone, I said, I need you to tell me if it's not a good time for that. If you can, like, I don't care if it's like right when you answer the phone, if you could just say, hey, I'm really exhausted, or I may not have much time, or I'm not at 100%, that would cue me so that I know this is not a time for a brain dump. So a little bit of that like intentional communication and giving each other a permission to know that you're not going to match up all the time, especially when you're dealing with different time zones, right? We're not going to match up all the time. So set expectations in the phone calls or the video calls, whatever kind of connection you're having. Set the expectation at the outset. Okay. So being able to say, like, what kind of call is this going to be, right? And if those deeper, more emotional conversations, it's not going to happen today, then maybe we be attentive to saying, it's not going to be today, but let's do it tomorrow. Like, don't just put it off forever. Intentionally say when it's going to be. Okay. Let me know if that did not answer your question on that, if you need me to break it down a little bit more. Okay, let me go to the question in the chat box. And then Laura, if you can find, if that wasn't it, help me find the other question that was way in the chat thread that I said come back to. All right, Jason, let's see. Okay, let's see. Another question is, okay, so difference in parenting. Okay, so this is a really great question, because some of the biggest forms of conflict that can come up when we are apart is, when we're home and we're doing the dance together. This is a specific parenting question, that when you are at a distance, the service member kind of has to let go and let whatever is happening at home, but you want to stay connected and you want to be involved and you want to still be the parent, right? And then all of our differences in parenting starts to come through, right? When you're at home, it is still a little bit of a dance, and it can become conflict. I come from a strengths perspective. I love the strength finder. I do the strength finder with all the couples that I work with, because it helps you navigate as a team how to leverage your strengths at the same time. And what that's done for Matt and I as a couple, especially as it relates to parenting, is I now see how Matt parents out of his strengths and how I'm parenting out of my strengths, and why we're different and how we sometimes clash. Okay. Matt is super strategic. So he is parenting in a very strategic way, to be very kind of cookie cutter and labeling in a way. Men who are also service members tend to be very strategic and logical. And so kind of coming at it like, stop doing that for this reason, and we're going to do this way, right? Now, I'm not saying that's how Matt parents, because he's got a very warm, compassionate side too. But I have kind of the opposite of that, the typical female, nurturing, over empathic type of parenting style, where I'm extending a lot of grace, and I am doing it from the warmth perspective, right? But there's value in both. And that's why when you guys are together, it's great to parent as a team, and using the strength finder to see those strengths, because it helps you when you're home to be able to lean on each other. And as a couple, sometimes be able to pull away from the parenting for a moment and go, hey, is this a strategic time, or is this an empathic time? Like, which way should we go at it with this dilemma that we're having right now? Those are our best moments as parents, right? When we can lean on each other and do the parenting marriage dance. One way isn't the right way all the time, right? And so we lean on each other. But when you're apart, some of those parenting styles start to kind of like, it's harder to lean on each other as a couple. So to answer this question, being able to lean on each other still as much as you can, to stay involved. There are times when I'm definitely going to, if I'm reaching my capacity at home, and this is normally a time when Matt would step in and he would lead with his strengths and parenting these young men that I'm raising, then I'm going to still create opportunities for him to step in and parent those boys, if it's something that can be delayed, right? If I can say, you know what, let's bring dad in on this. I think that this would be a great opportunity for him to speak to what's going on here with you guys right now, right? But if it's not a thing that I can bring him in on, or if it's something that I think is going to make Matt feel helpless to solve the problem because he's not here to solve it with me, then it's time for me. And this is something that Matt gave me vision casting permission that was so helpful before. He did this so many times before he left. He said to me so many times, and this was so empowering for me. He's like, it's okay that I have to go. This is your time to build a very long lasting, deep, confident relationship with these boys. And there's going to be things that are going to be really difficult for you to parent through, but you can do it, and you're going to grow through it. And the kids are going to be better for it because they're going to have to receive it from you. And what that did for me is it vision cast for me that there's going to be times I'm going to fail at it. There's going to be times I'm going to parent maybe not the best way, but the boys and I are going to have to figure that out together. So to answer this question specifically, that was me leading up to answering this question specifically. The question is about when you're having those parenting differences. It's very easy to look at the parent at home and say, I'm worried about the way that you're parenting, or I wish that you would parent this way. And I want to first acknowledge, I don't want to assume the feelings of whoever asked that question, but I think a lot of times the question is coming up more at, first of all, at a place of detachment of, this is what I would do and I'm not there. And because I'm not there, I can't do it. And I feel that distance. And then what you are afraid, both sides are afraid that if one person is parenting, it's going to kind of go on this trajectory that's going to make reintegration really hard, because reintegration now is going to be hard when we're trying to reinsert ourselves. And now we have a different parenting style. So as many times as we can do it together as possible is best. However, I think we need to, as service members, the best thing I can do is kind of lean on the advice of what I've heard from Matt and what I've heard from these other service members, and what I experienced during that small window of time, which was I had to let go. I had to let go of some things that I did not have control over. And I had to say, I'm going to trust that they can do the best job that they can do. And then I think it comes back to a marriage conversation. I think that in your private marriage conversations, coming back together and going, how are you doing? How do you feel like the kids are doing? How are you doing with discipline? How can I fit in? How can I help with that? Where do you feel like you're struggling? Do you feel like the kids are running over you? Do you feel like the kids feel like you're overbearing? Like, talk with me. Tell me how you're doing. Tell me whether or not this is working for you. And then be a helpmate to your spouse. That's what I would say. Be for your spouse, not against them. Okay. That's another thing that I want you guys to kind of walk away with today. Be for your spouse on both sides. Be for your spouse, not against them. And encourage them, cast vision for them, help them see the things that they cannot see. If it becomes kind of a disagreement, there may be some things we have to let go of. But you need to decide together what's our deal breakers? That's another way I want to answer that. What are your deal breakers? I'm just going to close these blinds a little bit since it's so bright. What are your deal breakers as parents that you can say, this is not acceptable for our kids to talk to you this way, to treat you this way. So that's like a deal breaker when it comes to our kind of agreement as parents. Is this is how we want our kids to be disciplined, how we want our kids to be raised up. And these are the lines that kids should not cross, right? And so deciding on those in advance will help you as your spouse at home is kind of hitting those lines. And I will tell you from experience, hitting those lines with your kids when they're kind of fighting that resistance, because all of that repressed emotion, all of missing their parent, all of those emotions tend to be taken out on the one parent at home. I hear that all the time. Like the service member is the good guy. And so all those emotions and everything comes back because it's the easiest person to let it all out on. And so on some levels, I think what I see a lot from spouses at home is that they're choosing their battles very carefully. And so some they're not going to fight on, and some they're going to be like, nope, this is the discipline. So just be mindful of that too, because they might be getting hit a lot. And so their discipline or the amount of discipline might go down, because you can end up feeling like from at home, you can feel like you're disciplining all the time and you get tired of yourself after a while. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, the question from earlier, thank you for the feedback on that. Thank you for your feedback. Okay, so the other question from earlier that I missed, thank you, Laura, was someone was going to be on deployment when the first baby is born. Any ideas to help us deal with the different stages? I would say take lots of pictures, surround yourself with really great support. I know in our first deployment, I had a good friend. I actually drove her to the hospital when her water broke so she could have her baby. And we surrounded her. We cleaned her house. We made sure to help take as many pictures as we could, to help that person stay connected as much as we could. So I would say, first of all, surround yourself with support. Surround yourself with ways to stay connected and sharing that as much as possible. And then ask your husband, the person that asked this question, ask your husband, what does your husband need to stay as connected as possible, right? Because that's going to be it's two different kinds of difficulty here, getting back to two different kinds of adventures. So for you, you're going to be navigating survival mode, right? But for your spouse, they're navigating complete detachment, okay? And feeling that, and possibly feeling the guilt too. So make sure you're communicating as a couple to that service member. What do you need from me to help you stay as connected as possible so that you're missing as little as possible? And take whatever they say as what they mean, okay? If they say, at first I can only handle like one picture a day, like, please don't send me 20, that's too overwhelming, then receive that. It's an overwhelming feeling to feel like you're missing out on things. Receive that as their answer. If they say they need more pictures, then get the support you need to send more pictures. Okay. I hope that answers that question. Communication, again, is key on that. Let's see. Matt had joined us back again, and I missed some of the things that he said. Matt acknowledges the first few months are survivals. Taking pictures and sharing any firsts for the service member. Know that The very young children don't remember much of the deployment. Yes. Again, we both want to just encourage you guys that your kids are going to remember this less than you think that they will. Now, I have teenagers that are going to remember a little bit more this time. This is going to form their emotions and how they handle their emotions and how they express their emotions. We're using that as our mission, right? So we're making this more intentional for the whole family now. But those young kids, they don't have to like swim in those deep emotions every single day. Okay. If they have a great day at preschool and if they haven't talked about it for a couple of days, that's okay. We're still going to all go through integration. Let's see. Shawnee says, we didn't have a baby while deployed, but just her husband left at 8 weeks. It's hard. Take pictures of her. It's okay if they're just crying. They're not always cute photos, and then uncute photos are just as important. Short videos to show the deployment. These are all great pieces of advice. I'm so glad you guys, remember I said I wanted you to share the wisdom. These are all great. So take short videos of their development so that they can see what's going on. One of our memories just popped up in our feed this week. It was so timely that Matt shared of me teaching our younger son how to ride a bike during a deployment. And that was so Matt could see him fail, see him struggle through it, what his strategy was. That was super important. All right, another question. Let's see. Other questions. Another question. What are some tips to help a newer married couple get through a first extended TDY? So when this is brand new, such a great question. And you guys are continuing to give great support. And I love our village coming together during this webinar. So fantastic. We're going to be taking some of these, hopefully these chats, and we'll make them we'll compile some ideas for those of you who are watching this recorded so that you don't miss some of this great wisdom. You're welcome, Laura, for the task of we're pulling that together. So the question is, what are some tips to help newer married couples get through a first extended TDY? So anytime you have a newly married couple and you're about to be separated for the first time, that's such a great question. I would say, first of all, when you're first married, and I would give this even for the first 5 years of marriage, there's so many expectations that we have on our spouse that we're not even aware of what those expectations are. My advice for any newly married couple from the beginning, regardless of you going through a separation or not, is for you to nail down what is marriage to you? What are the roles that you see you and your spouse, the roles that you see each other doing in your marriage? And also very, very important, because I'm dealing with so many couples who are now going through so much difficulty in their marriage now because they did not do this in the beginning. And we're not taught this. Most of us don't do this in the beginning. And that is, what are your rules for your marriage? What are your rules for marriage? Okay. In other words, how does a married couple treat each other? How does a married couple have arguments? How are we going to resolve those arguments? What are we going to do if somebody doesn't follow those rules? That is a huge thing that most couples don't talk about. What do you do when someone breaks those rules? I'll give you a very simple one that gets crossed all the time. Okay. You get married and you're saying, we're always going to be the best to each other, right? And then, you start to go through a valley as a couple. And then at some point, somebody in the midst of a really intense argument brings the word divorce up, right? Or says some kind of catastrophic phrase, and you're just devastated because you didn't even know that that's not something that you thought would ever happen in your marriage. Like, we weren't going to cross that line of saying we're going to end the relationship just because we're in a big argument, right? That's one of those kind of like rules that we don't talk about from the beginning, that we don't decide as a couple from the beginning. What will we not do? But then we also have to talk about, what are we going to do if that happens? Because that's where couples get stuck too. We get stuck in, we just crossed that line because we were at our worst in that argument and we didn't talk about, now what do we do? Do we forgive each other? How do we forgive each other? How do we talk through that? How do we set a good, healthy boundary of, you hurt me, that you crossed that line, and now am dealing with that hurt and I'm going to ask you to help me resolve that hurt, you've got to be able to have a conversation about what are we going to do? Okay. So if we're talking about a new married couple, first of all, you have to talk about what are your rules, what are your strategies, and what are your roles as a couple. And then you have to translate that into, now that we're separating, how do we meet those expectations as a couple? Okay. So how are we going to continue to meet those expectations as a couple, even though we're separated? If if it's important to you as a couple that we grow as a couple, that we get better and better and better, okay, then during a TDY, we can now apply that to a separation and go, we said that we were going to be about getting better. So how do we during a TDY work on it together and still grow even though we were apart? If we said that we were going to be a couple that communicates through our hurts and communicates through parenting or communicates our feelings, how are we now going to do that we're separated? How are we going to talk on the phone? How often are we going to talk on the phone? Okay. So how are we going to actually schedule that, be proactive with that? So the key here is that during an extended TDY, we are going to share in the adventures together. Matt and some other service members do a really good job of, if you are like in another country in a TDY, that you're sharing your adventure by not just having an adventure without everybody, but by sending some of those fun things home that you can only find in that country. That's a way of sharing the adventure, right? It is about sharing what's happening from home as well. It's about, so these separations are going to tend to make you feel like you're living parallel lives. So the key here is going to be, how do we intersect them as much as possible while we're separated, right? Phone calls do that, video calls doing that, sharing the adventure, care packages intersect, right? So we've got to plan as many intersections as possible to counteract the parallelness that we're having in that experience. Okay. All right. So we are having some great back and forth, some great advice going back and forth. Let's see, some great, I love the fact that a few of you are helping each other parenting through some of these young kids. Time for one last question. One last question. Anybody have one more question? One more question that you have for us to wrap up today. Again, today's topic, so grateful and surprised and thankful that Matt was able to join us. That was a nice surprise that he was able to join us. But we have time for one other question. If you have it, again, we're talking about ripping the Band-Aid, saying goodbye, and then getting back on mission. Tell me, I'm going to come up with one if you guys don't have one, because we're talking about how do you get on mission and stay connected? Taking care of yourself, actually striving and reaching some goals, actually like growing, actually getting on purpose without feeling the guilt, feeling your guilt, that doesn't sabotage your growth. Okay. Matt's asking, what's your favorite care package add-in? I love that. I think, actually, thank you. He's always great at coming up with, we usually do this great back and forth. And so when he's not here, but that's actually an example of us going back and forth. Yes, go ahead and put in your favorite care package add-in. And I'm going to say why, and I'll expand on this as a great closeout. Okay. Care packages are a way for you to intersect those parallel lives and for you to stay connected, right, while we're apart. And I think that those care packages on both sides, even if you're geo-batching, I hope you're still doing care packages. By the way, service members, if you are listening, Brave Crates was created by a military spouse that is a subscription care package box that's delivered to your spouse. And if you don't need family and friends and a million churches in your neighborhood and all the schools sending you care packages, when people ask you, can we send you a care package? Don't be afraid to say, I have, what I need. Would you mind sending a care package to my spouse and my kids? Okay. So share the love on that. But care packages both ways can be a great way to have that part of your mission. Your mission for yourself, get a care package for yourself, spouses at home. Brave Crates box subscription for yourself or for a friend can be a great mission. Your mission can be, I'm going to take better care of myself. I'm going to make a point to serve someone else, maybe another spouse. But your care package to your spouse can now be part of mission mindedness of how I'm going to stay connected in my marriage and stay connected as a family. And we're going to be creative in some fun, interesting ways and be thinking on that level. And that's going to be part of our mission to stay focused on being grateful for what we do have. Okay, so let's read off some of the things you guys are coming up with. I love these. These are great. Somebody said, my husband loves anything from HEB. Now we are in Texas where the HEB grocery store is. So I love that. Okay. Let's see. Favorite snacks from home. Write notes for my husband to read when he's feeling a certain way, and he writes those for me as well. So I'm assuming this means, Trish, things like open this when you're sick, open this when you're happy, open this when you're sad. So they're like specific messages. I love that. Great chocolate. I know I send Matt in every care package. We do that even when he's home, like really good, high quality chocolate is what he loves. A photo. One of the things that Matt mentioned that I'm going to see if it exists is, even though our kids are older and they're not coloring pictures anymore, because I was like, what do I send you in a care package? Because our kids are teenagers. They're not like doing little colorings from school. He was like, I wouldn't even mind. Like, I'm going to see if I can find like a puzzle of things that you can color, like blocks you can color, and then you can send it and it eventually forms a picture. I don't know if that exists. I think we can actually even make it and then like cut it into pieces and we'll color it and send it. I think that'd be fun. And that way, over time, it builds a picture. Don't you love that idea, Matt? It's not even a surprise, but we're going to make it happen. Okay. Let's see. Shawnee says she raids the pantry and whatever's in there that he eats that she can't stand. I love it. I love it. Trish said exactly. I will say from a spouse perspective that care packages get really difficult over time because you feel like you're starting to send the same thing all the time. And so getting those ideas are really helpful and important to be able to. Don't be afraid to send themed care packages. I learned that at one point. You can send like themes when you start to like lose ideas of random things. After a while, care packages turn into just random things. So being able to send things that are themed. When I was over there, thank you, Trish, gave collage.com. You can pick the size puzzle piece so they can put it together and create a picture. It's great for downtime. Love that. Thank you for helping me with that. When I went overseas, I just want to kind of give, there's different service members, different branches that are listening to this. Obviously, those of you who are in the Navy, who are on a ship, may not have a giant wall to put a puzzle of coloring collage on there. So everybody has different needs out there. Make sure you communicate for sure. But I know when I was in Iraq, those of you who just have a small cot and that's all you have, some of our female service members were very frustrated because they would get a bunch of stuff, but they have nowhere to put it, right? So it was thinking about, but what they loved were things, they loved smelly good things, and they loved things that they couldn't get from Amazon, right? Things that they could not order for themselves, but they wanted family members to be mindful of the space that they have. So they wanted things that they could consume, that they couldn't get easily over there, but they could consume over time and not keep because they can't accumulate so much for so long. So be mindful of where they are, and what their needs are. And that's really helpful. So staying connected for sure. Okay, so we are wrapping up. I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys have some ideas of how you can set some new goals. I know we didn't talk about because I think there's all kinds of goals. Some of you guys, Laura, I'm going to let you come back on as I'm closing out, but I just want to encourage you guys as kind of like a call to action, kind of thinking forward here when we're being on mission. I just want to encourage you guys that your mission is going to be specific to you and to the season of life that you're in. Okay. Your kids are different ages, or you don't have kids. You might be in a career, your marriage is at different seasons. And so I think that you need to remember that your mission is going to be different depending on what season you're in and whether you're at home or whether you're abroad and you're serving and you're detached, right? The point, I hope the message that you guys are getting today is that feel the feelings that you have because they mean connection. Tears aren't weakness, okay? And especially even for your kids, tears are not weakness. It actually gives them permission to have tears themselves, especially those little boys out there that are learning to have emotions, right? Teaching them that feeling their emotions means that they are connected to themselves, you're connected to your body when you have those tears and you have those emotions, that you need to feel them, process them. And then we all need to learn how to then leverage getting kind of out of that pit and doing something productive. And that gratitude just happens to be one of those tools that helps us get it out. Okay. Get out of that space, redirect your kids that direction too. So feel our emotions, use gratitude as that leverage, as that tool. Then we need to be about being on mission. What is your own personal goal? What are those things that you want to really strive for, change, that you've been wanting to change for a long time? I know I told Matt, I'm going to get back to my music again. I actually want to take a class in interior design. I'm terrible at it. Like it takes me years to decorate a room, y'all. I'm going to ask for, down the street technically is moving with military, Maria Reed. I know she's done some things with the USO. I'm going to invite her over and teach me a class on how to decorate, because I want to get better at that. Right. And you can do that abroad too. Like, what is it that you have been wanting to do for a really long time that you've wanting to hone in and be better? Matt and I talked last time about we have mottos for things. And I don't know if he's adopting this motto, but he actually said it and doesn't realize that he said it. And I took it on as my motto. He forgot that he said it. And here's my motto for the deployment. You guys can hold me accountable to this as we go through the series. My motto is do good, be better. That's my motto. I want to be about doing good, which means I need to do at least some kind of act of kindness. I need to be about bringing some level of good in my world, in my home, in my family. It's going to keep me out of that pit, right? Do good and be better. That does not mean strive for perfection. Do you guys hear me? It is not about perfection. It is about me saying, every day I'm going to mess up. Every day is going to be difficult in some way. It's going to have some level of challenge. But at the end of that day, I want to say, okay, I'm going to pick myself up tomorrow. I'm going to be better. I'm going to be better tomorrow. Okay. Do good, be better. I hope you guys felt like you got some things today that resonated with you. I will be going back to that listening guide. I kind of gave you in the listening guide, for those of you who are listening to this live, lots of places just process and take notes. And then I'm going to be taking this recording and kind of breaking it down and being a little bit more intentional on what we covered today. So use your listening guide to apply it to your life and actually bring action out of it and be better because of it. Okay, so hopefully you guys got something from it. Thank you for your great questions, great feedback, great conversation. I hope it makes you feel like I feel right now, which feels like you're a little bit more connected in this world. COVID and deployment and separations and all of this makes us all feel disconnected. And so I just appreciate you guys making me feel a little bit more connected. And thank you to the USO for giving me a place to connect even with my spouse while we're disconnected today in this webinar. What a happy surprise. It was a happy surprise. So
Well,
Laura, thank you.
yes, thank you. And, I'm so glad Matt was able to join us. I know my face lit up when I saw him starting to chat in the chat box. The next time he should be calling in as we go through this series. We're hoping that if technology and timing works out, that Matt will actually be calling in from his location for this. So it'll be Corie and Matt having that really authentic conversation together for all of us. So we're excited for that. Thank you, Corie, for, again, being honest and sharing your authentic self. And Matt, you were able to do that through the chat box, and we really appreciate that. We did have some really great conversation today, and thank you to everyone for participating in that. I know sometimes it's hard to be so vulnerable, especially in front of others, and it just makes it so much better when other people can validate their own experiences. So thank you for doing that. As a reminder, that will not be shared anywhere. So whatever you typed is safe. This recording, however, will be put up on our USO website. Trish is going to go ahead and put that in the chat box. I just wanted to also mention, Trish is going to put up a slide here in a second with Corie and Matt's favorite resources that they have through their Life Giver website. If you have not been yet, please check that out. It's a wealth of knowledge. Lots of great things to check out. Corie's podcast, but also some of their recommended books, including some children's books as well. So that's a really great website to go to. And then we also have Trisha's going to put up the website on the slide as well for our next events in the series and how you can find out more about those. The next one scheduled is December 8th. And then we're hoping to do one on December 11th too. Corie and I agreed, we put a little asterisk next to that just in case some things change, especially with Matt's schedule. We all know how that is when they're gone. But we will be putting all the up-to-date information up there. So be sure to check that out. And that one will be specifically geared towards being a part during the holiday season, which we know can be a little bit harder for us. So with that, thank you, Corie, as always. Thank you, Matt. I'm glad you made it to where you are safely. And we're looking forward to continuing this series. And be sure to check out uso.org/programs for more information on all the things we do. I saw Heidi put up wanting to do something with Maria Reed, and we have done something with her, and I will put in another plug to do something with her again. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Can I be a part of that one?
Yes, I know, right, Corie? Maybe we'll have her go to your house.
Thank you, guys.
With that, yeah, thank you, Corie. Stay safe. Everyone stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much.